For more on the Democratic primaries and what happens next, let's bring in our panel. Joining us now from Long Island, New York, is Christopher Hahn. He's the host of the Aggressive Progressive syndicated radio show. Also with us via Skype is Rina Shah. She's the Republican strategist and founder and principal of Rilax Strategies in Washington, D.C. Here in our studio, Alaina Beverly worked in the Obama administration as the associate director in the Office of Urban Affairs, and from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Hughes is the co-founder and executive board member of Students for Bernie at the University of Michigan. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Alaina, let me start with you right here in the studio. So let's look at the big picture. We've had another round of voting, and as we just reported, Joe Biden took 5 states. He now has a lead of something like just over 150 delegates over Bernie Sanders. What do you make of it?
Well, Joe Biden really pierced the theory of electability for Bernie Sanders yesterday with the primary, including with the delegate reach into Michigan, in part because Bernie Sanders, his theory of the case is that he has the greatest reach with working class white voters and also with younger voters. And what we found in the returns from Michigan last night is that those voters, all counties, went for Joe Biden. Those counties like Washtenaw County, where University of Michigan is located, in Ingham County, where Michigan State University, a large youth population, is located, those all went for Joe Biden. So that in part upsets Bernie Sanders' theory of electability, that he is the one to expand the electorate, that he is bringing people into his movement, and it's making it difficult for everyone in the Democratic Party, frankly, to see the path forward for Bernie Sanders. It's going to be very difficult for him to catch up after this round of Super Tuesday states, and going forward, his path forward is very inhospitable in the states that are coming up in the next round of Super Tuesday states. Those states include Florida, where he has some challenges with even the more conservative Latino population in Florida because of comments that he's made about Fidel Castro and his positioning as a democratic socialist. We have states like Ohio that is very demographically and economically similar to what we saw in Michigan last night, and then as well as Illinois, and then we have Arizona. So the Democratic establishment, many of them asked for, started calling for Bernie Sanders to exit the race as of yesterday. And when he addressed his voters today, he said that he was looking on to the debate that's coming up this Sunday. So we are going to see the contenders go head-to-head for the first time, and I think he is hoping that the debate will be a place where he can shift his momentum and get back to a more successful trajectory.
Right, let's go to Christopher Hahn. Christopher, the New York Times reports that Biden has now taken control of the nomination process. We've also heard from other publications, and they are saying that this nomination is Biden's to lose. Question is he going to keep control? Bernie Sanders says, I'm not stepping down. I'm looking forward to the debate on Sunday.
Yeah, he's going to keep control. Bernie Sanders is not going to have a better week next week. He's going to have a worse week next week. He's going to lose Florida. He might not even be viable in the state of Florida. Your previous guest hit the nail on the head. Bernie Sanders had a theory of the case that he would bring out this incredible youth vote, and that youth vote would carry him to victory. That's not going to happen. So now what Bernie Sanders is kind of like an old baseball player whose best days are behind him and doesn't know when to quit. He'll go to the debate. Look, I'm not saying that what Bernie Sanders has brought up during this campaign isn't relevant and shouldn't be addressed, but we have bigger fish to fry in this country. We have a president that's off the rails. We have a coronavirus that's threatening everything in this country, including our economy. We need to start getting ready to take on Donald Trump. It's not time for fun and games with Bernie Sanders just so that he could stay on the stage for one more week. I would be shocked if next week is anything but a worse repeat of this week, where he loses even bigger states by bigger margins. He's not going to win this primary, and all he's doing right now is prolonging the inevitable. And everybody would be happy if Bernie, got out of the race, stayed engaged, and if Joe Biden worked with Bernie Sanders and his supporters to address the issues that are important to them. And the only way we're ever going to make any movement towards solving these problems is if a Democrat is in the White House next year. Right. If we have 4 more years of Donald Trump, we're going to have 4 more years of the same. So Bernie Sanders has to start asking himself this question. Is it more important to beat Donald Trump, or is it more important to prove a point or to be right? In my past experience with Bernie Sanders, including recent history, he has shown that he'd rather be proven right than win. For example, his whole bit on Castro, which he said back in the 80s, he could have walked that back, and he was wrong about Castro. The Castro program was being used by the Castro regime to indoctrinate kids so that they would trust Castro more than their parents. And Bernie Sanders had to know that, and he could have walked it back, but he didn't. He doubled down on it on 60 Minutes, then he tripled down on it during the debate. That's a sign of a guy who would rather be right than win.
All right.
And frankly, if we don't beat Donald Trump this year, this country will be forever changed, and he needs to get on board now.
All right. Thanks, Christopher. Alaina, very quickly, I just want to get some clarity on something here. When we say that Sanders lost the youth vote, does it mean that the youth vote went to Biden, or they didn't come out to vote?
Oh, it means that they went to Biden. And it's important to note that turnout was extremely high for this primary.
Right.
Turnout in Michigan was increased by 30% as compared to in 2016.
Right.
It also increased in Missouri and increased in Mississippi. And this is important because we are going to need that level of enthusiasm as Democrats when whomever the nominee is up against Donald Trump. That portends that there's a possibility of flipping Michigan back from red, going for Trump, to blue, going for the Democratic nominee.
All right. Porter Hughes, well, as we've just heard, a very tough night for Bernie Sanders. Let's listen to part of what he had to say.
Well, my thoughts on the election, as someone who's on the ground.
One moment, Porter. I just want to play something that Bernie Sanders said. Just listen to this.
While our campaign has won the ideological debate, we are losing the debate over electability. I cannot tell you how many people our campaign has spoken to who have said, and I quote, "I like what your campaign stands for. I agree with what your campaign stands for, but I'm going to vote for Joe Biden because I think Joe is the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump."
So, Porter, what do you make of that? You know, it's basically Bernie Sanders saying, look, as we heard Christopher tell us as well, the ideas are great, but he can't sell them.
I did hear that from some voters here on the ground, even from my fellow students, who, from anecdotally, were in support of Bernie Sanders in a lot of ways. And there was some CNN exit polls that did say that around 82% of 18 to 29-year-olds did vote for Bernie Sanders in the election. Obviously, the youth turnout is much lower than the older voter turnout, but I think that he is right in terms of that. I really wish the campaign had focused a lot more on electability and bringing in older voters to the conversation. I feel like he would have been a much better fit to take on Donald Trump than Joe Biden. And especially since centrist establishment Democrats have had a really hard time here in the Midwest. There was a poll that came out recently that had Bernie up over Trump and Biden and Trump were tied, both through that empirical data and anecdotally, as someone who has lived here my entire life in Michigan, it's going to be hard for Joe Biden coming up in these states, especially in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, states that went for Donald Trump last year or last election cycle, because these people remember NAFTA. I know so many people and so many of my family friends and family who have lost their jobs because of these trade deals that Joe Biden has supported. And Trump is going to be able to use that against Joe Biden and weaponize that against him. And as much as I disagree with Trump on his policies, he knows how to campaign. He knows how to talk to those people. These people that live in these Midwest states, he knows how to relate to them. He knows what their issues are and what they're concerned about, and he can tap into that. And I feel like it's going to be very difficult for Joe Biden coming up, especially since the Democratic establishment has been attacking Sanders supporters so hard with these false Bernie bro narratives that seem to come up all the time and overcome focus on his policies and instead are attacking his supporters.
Go ahead.
Well, so as a Michigander myself, I was also born and raised in Michigan, and I do appreciate the ethos that my colleague mentioned. However, I think that Michiganders and folks in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, battleground states, and Ohio, battleground states that we are going to need in order to win the general election, I also think that they have a long memory. It is not just Joe Biden's position on NAFTA. I think they're also going to remember that he was the champion of the Recovery Act and that he was the person who was getting shovel-ready jobs out the door. I worked in the White House when he was there guiding the dollars and making sure that we were saving the auto industry. So as much as there is a lot of anxiety about free trade agreements and trade agreements under the Trump administration, I also think that these communities are going to remember that when the rubber met the road and there was economic decline and we were trying to recover, Joe Biden was their champion.
All right, let me
throw some math in here.
I'll get you in a moment, Christopher. I just want to bring in Rina Shah. Rina, of course, the Trump campaign is looking very closely at what's going on the Democratic side. President Trump, in fact, has already brought up Joe Biden. I think he sort of sees Joe Biden as being his rival come the presidential campaigns. He's brought up Joe Biden's verbal gaffes and growing questions that we're seeing mainly on social media, I should say, right now, about Joe Biden's mental ability to run the course of this election. Are we going to see much more of that from the Trump campaign?
Well, I'd like to offer you my opinion as a lifelong Republican who cast her first vote for a Democrat just last week in Virginia. I voted for Joe Biden because I want a more decent America. I think where we are right now is a very polarized country, and there have been a lot of factors that have brought us to this point. It's not just the person who's occupied the Oval Office, and it's not simply race issues either. We can't point to one thing, but what we know for sure is that if we continue down this road 4 more years of a demagogue and this gentleman who, he's not even a gentleman. We are used to a president that's a gentleman, and the president right now does not seem to have his senses. He doesn't understand that a pandemic has made many Americans like myself, who grew up in an era of Ebola, and of course I remember SARS. They never made us feel like this. And so if our president can't make us feel safe, I think he's going to have a really big problem come November. But it's a long time until November. And a couple of things have happened here. Number one is that Joe Biden's candidacy, I believe, would be stronger today if it weren't weakened by the mainstream media really inflating these gaffes and making it seem like he's not mentally cognizant and capable. And secondly, the impeachment process also weakened Vice President Biden. I mean, let's not make any jokes about that. I mean, he really came out on the losing end when the Senate chose not to convict. And there was only one Republican that looked at the facts and said, yeah, we should convict. So that in and of itself, the president having survived that and not being removed, gave ammo to the Trump administration, to the RNC, to say, let's continue down this road and hope that Biden is not only weakened by the sort of intra-party politics and Sanders refusing to exit stage left. There's also Medicare for all. Let's not forget that on the Democrats, they had such a wide stage, a huge number of candidates that stood up. It reminded me of Republicans back in 2015, 2016. It was such a big field, and thankfully that's narrowed now completely. But I also think that weakened Joe Biden's position as well. I mean, all these many weeks, it's an exhausting thing. And these two men, Sanders and Biden, are not young. Trump is not young either, but he's the younger of the three. Okay. And I do believe we are unfortunately as a country given a tough choice. Do we want decency or and somebody who understands how things should work from the federal level?
All right, I want to move back to Christopher. Christopher, let's listen to something that Joe Biden said on Tuesday night. Let's watch this.
Yep. And I want to thank Bernie Sanders and his supporters for their tireless energy and their passion. We share a common goal, and together we'll defeat Donald Trump. We'll defeat him together.
So, Christopher, there we have Joe Biden reaching out to Bernie Sanders supporters, but there has been some reporting out there that says that if Biden is the nominee to take on Donald Trump, that Bernie Sanders' core supporters are going to sit out the election. They're not going to vote.
Yeah, I don't buy that. I mean, some of them will. But let me just give you the math from Michigan last night. Yeah. There were about 350,000 more people that voted last night, and Joe Biden clobbered Bernie Sanders in Michigan. 4 years ago, there were about 100,000 Michiganders that voted in the Democratic primary that did not show up for the general election. The fact that there were 350,000 more voters last night should give everyone confidence that Joe Biden will win Michigan. We've seen higher turnout in a lot of the primary states. We didn't see higher turnout in any of these caucus states, which I think are ridiculous and should be gone anyway.
Yeah.
It's up to Joe Biden, and it's also somewhat up to Bernie Sanders to reach out to the Bernie Sanders supporters and make sure they feel comfortable and welcomed in a Joe Biden administration. Joe Biden's going to have to pick a running mate that will reach out and reach across to them. I think he will.
Right. That job of reaching out to Bernie Sanders supporters, they don't have much in common, do they? I mean, if you look at some of the core policies, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, Biden doesn't support Medicare for all. He doesn't support a tax on billionaires. In fact, he's been taking money from them. He doesn't support free education, and he supported the Iraq war, and Bernie Sanders has made a strong point of saying that I didn't support that war.
Well, I mean, look, there are going to be things that they disagree on, but look, I was a student advocate like Porter was back in the late 90s, and I remember supporting, candidates that were far to the left of who we wound up picking in Bill Clinton. I was a Jerry Brown supporter during that first campaign for Bill Clinton. I wound up becoming a Bill Clinton supporter after Jerry Brown got out of the race, but Bill Clinton reached across, found us. There's a way people will come together, because I think the real problem here is Donald Trump, and I think we all share that common goal of defeating Donald Trump, because frankly, he is just an existential threat to this country. And if you didn't believe that before, I think the last 3 weeks have changed your mind. Okay, let me go to Porter. Porter, given these massive differences in ideology that we see between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, will Bernie Sanders supporters, do you think, come out and vote for Biden if he's the nominee?
I think there's going to be a much different atmosphere around this versus the 2016 election. There was a statistic back during 2016 that 15% of Bernie Sanders supporters went to vote for Donald Trump. I would not have been one of those if I was old enough to vote, and I still will not be one of these in the coming election. But what I'm hearing from on the ground from Sanders supporters is that they aren't very confident in Joe Biden's abilities. There's a lot of people who are not even going to vote for him, and I think that's something that they should seriously consider. Obviously, as I said in my past comment, the establishment and the media has done a very poor job of catering to us. The establishment loves to talk about unity. They love this idea, but when they mean by unity is to fall in line behind them and their failed ideologies and ideas. Neoliberalism is a disease to this country, and we Sanders supporters are sick of it. We are sick and tired of being told to fall in line behind the establishment every time that they pick a candidate that we don't like. We're sick and tired of it, and we don't think that Joe Biden has what it takes to take on.
One moment, Christopher. Let him finish, Christopher. 1 moment.
I'm sorry. African-American voters in South Carolina are not the establishment. Working whites in Michigan are not the establishment. Joe Biden had no money. He was outspent and outgunned, and the voters picked him.
60 billionaires that are funding him. 60 billionaires. That's not the establishment.
Stop your
that is
whining
the
and crying,
establishment.
Porter. Grow up.
Okay, go ahead, Porter. Finish what you were saying.
When Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, and Obama start lining up behind him, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and 60 billionaires, that's not the establishment. That is exactly the establishment. And that is part of what is wrong with the country.
Oh, please.
Okay, Rina, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, this sort of bickering is exactly what the Republicans are counting on. And I'm your Republican guest here to say that, look, people like me, the Republican Party lost me when they elected a man who I did not find to be a conservative. I am still very much a fiscal conservative. But what I see in Sanders supporters is a lot of what I remember in 2015 and 2016, the Make America Great Again crowd telling me to get in line behind a disruptor. Yep. And look at what he's done. He's messed us up fundamentally. He has no understanding of economics. And frankly, everyone's suffering. Everyone's going to continue to suffer. Any good economy we had was a result of Obama-era policies. The guys that he's put in the White House, and I guess I want to say guys because he hasn't really put women in top spots in this administration. And I'm not one for quotas or anything, but this is really looking more like the 1950s America than the America that my parents came to in 1980. And this election is not going to be won about policies. It's going to be about values and the kind of America we're all willing to live in. So I think we really got to talk about one big thing here.
Right.
Is that we have such a long time to go until November, and our lawmakers right now in Congress have failed us by not ensuring that our elections are secure. Right. And frankly, tech companies have failed us as well. And so we need to really look out for ourselves, and we need to, as Americans, recommit to each other and recommit to a societal pact that says we want more decent leadership that reflects a more just.
All right, Rina, I need to move on. Alaina, you wanted to say something. You said that Barack Obama did not support.
Barack Obama has not not endorse anyone. There is this rumor or mythology that Barack Obama has placed all of his support behind Joe Biden. Joe Biden has actually said that he does not want the endorsement of Barack Obama. He didn't lead with that coming into the race, in part because he didn't want...
There has been some reporting, though, that he was the one who made the telephone call to Pete Buttigieg to get out of the race, to consolidate moderate support.
He had a conversation with Pete Buttigieg, but Pete Buttigieg has said that he came to his own conclusion and his own decision in endorsing Joe Biden. And I think what you're seeing is a number of rivals and a number of Democrats coming home believing that Joe Biden is the person who is
Why
most
did he make
electable.
the call to Pete Buttigieg, then?
He spoke to all of the candidates. He spoke to all of the candidates as they were getting into the race, and the public ethos has suggested that Pete Buttigieg has a very significantly strong future in the Democratic Party, and that he might be the next Barack Obama in many ways. He made history being the first gay man to secure the nomination for not the nomination, but win Iowa.
Right. There is something that Bernie Sanders said about why he's trailing Biden in these primary races. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We are winning the generational debate. While Joe Biden continues to do very well with older Americans, especially those people over 65, our campaign continues to win the vast majority of the votes of younger people. Today, I say to the Democratic establishment, in order to win in the future, you need to win the voters who represent the future of our country, and you must speak to the issues of concern to them.
So what is driving Democratic voters here? Is it just purely electability? Because have we heard much detail about Joe Biden's policies on things like healthcare or education or taxes?
Well, in part, people are relying on his record, his 30-year record in this game, as well as his record as vice president. So they're seeing it as a return to normalcy and a return to Obama-Biden type policies.
But isn't his record what gave us Donald Trump?
Oh, well, I would disagree with that. I think I would completely. I mean, policy-wise, I don't think his record is what gave us Donald Trump. I think a poorly executed campaign is what gave us Donald Trump.
Yeah.
However,
I'm saying the situation in the country. I mean, there's been a lot written about this. Why Donald Trump became the president, the most unlikely president, and why he became there was because people saw the country not working for them, especially the 99%, as we refer to them.
Exactly. Well, but we were coming back from a recession.
Yeah.
So I think that you saw the changing demographics in this country and quite a bit of fear, particularly among white working class voters, that the pie, for whatever reason, might not be big enough for them. And so now it's important that whomever is the nominee create a big tent, both for the future of the Democratic Party, meaning the younger voters who are having difficulty in this economy, as well as to white working class voters who feel like they have been left out in some ways in the shuttering of the auto industry and other industrialized cities, and as well as the communities of color, and trying to rectify historic wrongs and systemic racism. All of us need to be served by our president.
All right, I want to go very quickly, Porter. I don't have much time, but I want to know what you make of that. Is it Joe Biden's record that's going to get him into the White House?
I don't believe so. I frankly feel like if there's anything that's going to do it, it's going to be his electability argument. If he wants to win, he needs to make himself appear over Trump. But I also do feel like there is some things that part of his record that do make him unelectable, especially with NAFTA and Trump here. And as much as the Biden was part of the Obama administration that did help the auto industry come back here in states like Michigan, it's not like it was a total, complete revival. I mean, there are still tons of people without good paying jobs.
Okay, Porter.
I know so many people that have lost their
sorry,
jobs
I've got to go. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching. Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, You may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week, we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists, and others. It's a fresh, focused, and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict, or US politics, the Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find the Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search the Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.